Thank you for tuning in once again to his Vine and Fig Tree podcast. My name is Kurt Olson. I'm your host. I'm coming to you on the early afternoon of March 12, 2025. And I have a little bit of everything in this episode. Um, uh, and we're going to start with some Team Biden information. Um, I would hope that we're going to eventually find out who was actually running things in the Biden White House and what percentage the president was actually doing it compared to other people. Real, that's a scandal of mammoth proportions. And for all the screaming about a constitutional crisis going on the left right now and in the mainstream media, the legacy media, about the constitutional crisis involving Elon Musk and what he's doing with Doge. The real constitutional crisis is we potentially had people running the government in the previous administration who weren't actually elected by the American people. I find that far more scandalous than anything Elon Musk is doing. Um, and we're going to start with um, something that emerged late last week from the Heritage Foundation. The Heritage Foundation um, the Heritage Foundation did what was called the oversight project, and basically what they did is they took a look at um, the signatures. They got a hold of as many documents as possible from the Biden era, and they took a look at the signatures. And the goal was to identify how many of these were by original signature, because no signature by a single person is always identical, although you can basically go, yeah, that person signed that. Yeah, that's their signature. Um, because in other situations, there was what's called an auto pen. And I'll get to that in a second. So the Heritage Foundation does this analysis of documents. This would be executive orders, pardons, other things from the Biden administration. And come to find out, there was one document, one, that seemed to have an original Joe Biden signature. And that was the letter that emerged last July when he announced he was stepping out of the race after the fiasco of a CNN debate. A few weeks pass, and all of a sudden, on a Sunday afternoon, a letter's dropping saying, I'm withdrawing from the race. And we know what happened from there. He endorsed Kamala Harris. She became the nominee, and the rest is history. After the Heritage Foundation released that information last week, Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey wrote the following: I am demanding the DOJ, that's the Department of Justice, investigate whether President Biden's cognitive decline allowed unelected staff to push through radical policy without his knowing approval. If true, these executive orders, pardons, and all other actions are unconstitutional and legally void. So, Andrew Bailey is an attorney general who's fairly active with some stuff happening even at the federal level, obviously paying attention, stuff happening in his own state. But once this information from the Heritage Foundation emerged, he put together a 2 or 3 page letter that basically explains the legal argument he is making here, and that someone at the Department of Justice, Inspector General, someone investigate what happened with these signatures. And an auto pen is something that happened. It's happened over time, as we got into probably the mid and late 20th century, with all the documents that presidents were signing. They basically some kind of an instrument. I don't know if it was a computer or whatever. Uh, Basically, take that president's signature and duplicate it as best as possible. And but that's the argument here. If you had all of this stuff that was produced with an auto pen, what was Joe Biden aware of and what was Joe Biden not aware of? And when he was not aware of something, who was running the government? Because the Constitution puts that authority on really under two people, the president and the vice president. And if the vice president wasn't doing it, that means there was an unelected individual involved in that process. And that'll be a very interesting thing to watch as we move forward. Does an inspector general report emerge on this? Frankly, I don't think an inspector general is going to touch this with a 10-foot pole. I don't think this person, if they find information they don't like, they don't want to be the person that raises the constitutional crisis, scary quotes intended, um, of what would emerge from that. Um, but it's a very interesting story to watch. Going along with potential scandals, this happened last Thursday. No, Friday. Um, no, Thursday. I'm sorry. Um, so U.S. Senator Joni Ernst. She is one of the senators from the state of Iowa, Republican. Um, she came across that the Biden administration awarded a $28 million uh, grant or funding through the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health and Human Services to a mysterious vaccine company run by former COVID advisor in the Biden administration. And basically, this is based out of nothing but a Maryland P.O. box. And she's like, well, that raises all kinds of red flags. And if this is something that emerged to Biden's COVID advisor, what is it? Why was it? And that $28 million is potentially waste, fraud, or abuse. So I share that with you. Um, I'm going to dive a little bit into sports here very briefly, and sports in a direction um, n- not necessarily something I would mention here when I do dive into sports. You've heard me talk about college football, the Super Bowl. Um, this involves the Virginia High School League. The Virginia High School League is the high school uh, association throughout the state of Virginia. And recently, I don't know if this was last week or a little over a week ago, there was the Class 3 State Indoor Track Championships conducted at, oddly enough, Liberty University, my alma mater. And in this race, obviously the key positioning is 1, 2, and 3. And this video emerged last week. You may have seen it on the morning shows this week. I shared it on Facebook on Sunday after I saw it. So the girl that was leading the race, she was up by like 2 lengths, maybe 3, and she was beginning to pull away. So the real battle was between two and three. So you have a Layla Everett from IC Norcom High School in Portsmouth, Virginia, and you have Kaylin Tucker from, I believe it's Brookville High School in Lynchburg, Virginia. And they were rounding the fourth turn, coming into the straightaway toward the finish line. And Tucker emerged past Everett, at which point Everett, the video is really clear. She struck Kaylin Tucker in the head with the baton. This was the 4x200. And a lot of controversy emerged from this. IC Norcom High School got immediately disqualified from the Class 3 indoor state championships. And there has been not nearly enough apologies that have been coming to the direction of Kaylin Tucker, who is 16 years old, and Everett is 18. And Everett came out on Monday after the video emerged and said, people aren't accounting for my feelings. Immediately playing the victim card here, and it is just an amazing video. I would encourage you to track it down and find it and watch it for yourself. I had my wife watch it, who did run some track in high school, and she goes, after that 7 to 9 seconds play, she goes, "Play it again." I played it for her a second time, and she goes, "Yeah, the hands are not in the motion you would typically have for a track athlete running, and you can judge for yourself by watching that." Um, Additionally, on the issue of sports, I want to share something that came from. eh, why did I stop and read this? I don't know, because this is not a person I follow on Twitter. I think I got it in my feed because some people that are who I follow on X shared it, and I came across it, and I just thought it was fascinating. So this comes from a gymnastics and cheerleading coach by the name of Danny Wyatt. Danny spelled Dani. Um, I'm going to read what she wrote. I work with children. I coach gymnastics and cheerleading, as it says in my bio. I've been involved in athletics since I can remember. But what I've noticed over the past decade, especially in the last 5 years or so, something has seriously gone wrong with our children. Put aside the gymnastic angle and let me explain why I'm so worried. The kids today, not all, but a portion of kids today, don't know how to jump rope. They can't they can't run properly. They can barely do jumping jacks. These are basic motor skills, coordination skills that our kids are simply not able to do. And before anyone is snarky and blame me, and say it's my coaching, I am telling you it's not. Children are not playing outside the way they need to. Their attention span is much shorter. Letting our kids play on tablets, iPads, have access to smartphones is not parenting, and it's not helping your child. It is hindering them. I am not the only one noticing. They expect instant gratification instead of working hard to achieve a skill, because they're used to it by a touch of a button, getting exactly what they want in a moment at a moment's notice. We need to do better. Some things in life take hard work and dedication and helps build self-esteem. We need strong children so when they grow up one day, they can believe in themselves and they can and that hard work pays off. I am not trying to lecture anyone, but I am looking long term for our country and it is beginning to scare me. I am not saying abuse or mistreat your kids, but if things don't change, we are setting them up for failure, and one day they will be in charge in many different industries. Has anyone else noticed this, or is it just me? Anyways, that's what she communicates there about what she's noticing in children that are growing up. Now, what happened 5 years ago, folks? What happened 5 years ago? COVID. And if you go, just do the math. Let's say a kid is in seventh grade. In 5 years ago, they were in second. If they're a senior this year, 5 years ago, they were in junior high school or middle school. If they're a high school freshman, they were in their late elementary education years. And what did we tell the kids during COVID? They couldn't go outside. We had basketball courts completely just cut off from any ability to use for a period of time. We had skate parks that couldn't be used. California and some other states threw sand in them so the kids couldn't use them. Kids couldn't go on playground equipment, you name it. So if you do that at a certain age with a kid and you're beginning to see poor motor skills, and let's face it, what we saw in public education during COVID was something where many states had impact on kids in schools into a third year. And if the kids are struggling with academic achievement, how much of that has trailed over to physical education? I know when I was in school, we did jumping jacks, we ran, and we jumped rope. And those were things that we did at certain points during the school year. So I share that. Next, I want to get into this Thomas Massey stuff. Thomas Massey is a Republican from Kentucky. A year ago or thereabouts, his wife died. They had some children, but this is a guy who really isn't too concerned about the future, um, since he is now a widower. And we have a continuing resolution come to the House just yesterday, uh, on Tuesday. And of course, we have this razor thin majority in the House. Razor thin majority. So you can't have a lot of people leaving the reservation. You can't have defections because otherwise you're relying on Democrats to pass something. So the Republicans have to have their caucus together. Well, when it comes to continuing resolutions, Thomas Massey's done because several years ago, there were promises that were supposed to have been made by his own caucus, and they didn't follow through on those promises. And since that period of time, he said, okay, you made your choice, I'm making mine. So you don't get my cooperation on continuing resolutions. And He's voted his conscience. He's voted with principle. So this triggered President Trump. And so what did President Trump do? He said he wants someone to primary Thomas Massie. And Thomas Massie, I think, realizes his next election campaign in 2026 could be more expensive than anyone he's run so far. But he's not scared because he's been primaried in the past, even by people connected to Donald Trump, and these people can't get past 20 to 30% of the vote. So, what's interesting here, Trump goes on social media, reads him the Riot Act, and imagine if Trump had simply taken Massey's principle and flipped it. We need more people like this guy. We need more people who are willing to be principled and care about the size, scope, and cost of government. All of this comes as we're dealing with Doge. All of this comes when we are having conversations about what Doge is cutting and how much they've saved. And what if, what if between the House and the Senate, we had 250 people of the 435 who voted like Tom Massey? If that was the case, we wouldn't be having constant conversations about continuing resolutions because our Congress would be functioning properly. We wouldn't be talking about continuing resolutions in March, September, and then in December again. And rinse and repeat. So there are people who I know who disagree with me, people who are right of center. They disagree with me. They will say that, Kurt, he's grandstanding, he's showing off, he's uh, too much of a good thing. He needs to get in line because the it's a razor thin majority. He needs to get in line. I understand all of those arguments, but I personally can appreciate a member of Congress who refuses to be bullied by leadership and the president and says, I'm voting my conscience anyways, and says, the financial cliff that we're on is far more important to me. The the generational theft that's going on is far more important to me. Our failure to run a Congress the way it's supposed to be run is far more important to me. And frankly, it's refreshing. And for me, I've said this before on this podcast, and I'm going to say it again here. Donald Trump is not a conservative because a conservative response to Thomas Massey would have been, I want more people like him, and we're going to get the people who don't vote like him out of the House. That's what a conservative response would have been. And the other thing is this: is we've been talking about tariffs here since Trump became president. Um, in the comments to this podcast, I'm going to share a 5 minute and change address former President Ronald Reagan made to the country back in the 1980s as he was getting ready to have conversations with his Japanese counterpart. And issues of tariffs and trade war were conversations even then. And in that 5 minute video, Reagan explains in his address to the nation why tariffs are bad and the things that end up happening that are harmful to Americans and especially American consumers. So I'm going to leave that and uh, just kind of leave it where it is. But I definitely wanted to say something about the um Thomas Massey situation that started on Monday and has rolled into even Wednesday of this week. Um, I have two more things I want to share with you. One is from someone who I started following on X back in the fall, following Hurricane Helene and the damage that it caused in western North Carolina, parts of Tennessee. Um, and this is a guy who, he bragged about being a liberal. I can even recall one of the posts back last fall saying how really not someone who goes to church, but very impressed by Samaritan's Purse and other religious organizations that have stepped forward to help the people of Western North Carolina. So all of that happens as I share this from Matt Van Swal. Last name spelled VAN, second word Swal, SWOL. Matt Van Swal. Again, he's from Western North Carolina. Don't know the city, but again, started to follow him on X with some of the things he was posting from Western North Carolina. Damage, the inattention of the federal government, um, the crisis of people being kicked out of hotels at one point late in the Biden term, as we were in January before Trump took over, all of that. He wrote this and posted it on Monday, and it's been seen by over 1.5 million people. As a former liberal, now he's calling himself a former liberal. I think the right is fundamentally misunderstanding what is behind the current attacks on Elon Musk. I've seen a lot of rhetoric about how liberals just want to see everything burn. This is incorrect. It's actually worse. They believe they are doing true good in the world and that torching a Tesla creates an overall net positive. To get to this point, you have to fully believe a left-wing narrative about anyone successful, and that is this. If you're successful, the only way that you could have gotten there is by taking advantage of someone else. Being successful is akin to being a tyrant, and tyrants must be punished. Some successful people get out of the left's line of sight by saying all the right woke things, giving money to the right causes, sufficiently apologizing for their personhood. It's strikingly similar to a religious ritual. And it's interesting that someone who has said he's not a spiritual individual draws that connection. I continue. But there is nothing, absolutely nothing you can do supporting President Trump. It is the great sin in the left's religion. President Trump is so hated on the left, it's nearly impossible to convey how high this level of hatred rises. He is their literal devil, and if you dance with him, you are no different. It's upside down world of morality where anything goes if you believe you are fighting true evil, which the left fundamentally believes they are. This is what the right seems to be misunderstanding today. The current crisis for liberals is watching an existential battle between good and evil, where they believe evil is about to win forever. If you are good and the other side is evil, then nearly every action to fight evil is justified. Once you understand this, everything you're seeing will start to make sense. That from Matt Van Swal. The last thing I'm going to share with you is this thing is pretty intense for me, folks, and at some point I'm going to be coming out with a book on the persecuted church and some of the realizations that I made along the way. The persecuted church in the 21st century was a thing way before ISIS. Way before ISIS. And for the ISIS, the Islamic State. The people who had the beheading videos back in 2014, 15, 16. Okay? And last weekend, especially on Sunday afternoon, it was amazing to see some of the things that emerged on social media involving this issue. I saw videos of people preventing people from seeing their face. So the only thing you could see is their eyes. This one person even had a hat on, pleading for help because because Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the group that now runs the Syrian government, because they ran Bashar al-Assad out of the country back in what was it? I believe it was December. HTS was going into communities of religious minorities, Christians, Druze, and Alawites, and they were just slaughtering people. You have seen stories emerge, accounts that go from anywhere from 600 to 7,200. And here's the thing that bothered me. As things started unfolding Sunday into Monday, there were people who were aghast, shocked, horrified at the reports coming out of Syria. And you should be. But the problem is the persecuted church is pretty significant. The map runs from parts of Central America and Mexico through sub-Saharan Africa, although not exclusively sub-Saharan Africa, and into the Middle East, into Central Asia, into Asia and Southeast Asia. We shouldn't be picking and choosing which group of Christians who are persecuted the most, because all of it is bad. What I'm going to read to you, and this will be the second thing I link into this podcast, it's the 2025 World Watch List from Open Doors US. It came out in January. And Open Doors US does a marvelous job of having information on the ground, people around the world that are able to feed them firsthand accounts of what's going on. And I'm going to read the 50 countries. And you can catch the link and find it yourself and read it yourself. But I'm going to read the 50 countries. And a number of years ago, you saw three colors with this World Watch List: dark red, orange, and yellow. And there's no longer any yellow. The persecution levels are either extreme or very high. None of it's in the middle. I'm just going to read the list of countries: North Korea, Somalia, Yemen, Libya, Sudan, Eritrea, Nigeria, Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan. That's the top 10. India, Saudi Arabia, Myanmar, Mali, China, Maldives, Iraq, Syria, Algeria, Burkina Faso, Morocco, Laos, Mauritania, Bangladesh, Uzbekistan, Cuba, Central African Republic, Niger, Turkmenistan, Nicaragua, Mexico, Oman, Ethiopia, Tunisia, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Bhutan, Mozambique, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Egypt, Qatar, Comoros, Cameroon, Vietnam, Turkey, Colombia, Kyrgyzstan, Brunei, Chad, and Jordan. Those are the 50 countries on the 2025 Open Doors U.S. World Watch List. And if you are a follower of Christ and you regard yourself as such, and you are listening to this podcast, do not be outraged by just one thing going on in one location. All of the persecution around the world is bad and equally bad. Do not, and again, I am not suggesting what has been happening in Syria needs to be disregarded. I am not saying that. But it's equally bad what they're doing, what's happening elsewhere around the world to people who name the name of Jesus Christ as their Savior. And I've just been disgusted with the whole, let's put all the light here right now at the expense of elsewhere around the world, where there are people enslaved, where there are people who, China, the Uyghur Muslims in northwest China, they are sent to re-education camps. They are sent to labor camps. They are sterilized. All kinds of things in the name of loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party. Please, I beg you, don't call more persecution in one spot more significant than is happening elsewhere. Because the most dangerous place on the planet right now to be a follower of Jesus Christ . is sub-Saharan Africa. And I wrote about this last Sunday with the silence over the recent deaths of 70 people at a Protestant church in Kasanga, Congo. Virtually nothing in the legacy media that would draw any attention. So I'm not going to take any more of your time, and I'm sorry I'm ending this podcast on such a sobering note, but it has to be said. It absolutely has to be said. Um, so I will be sharing the Ronald Reagan comments on tariffs and the 2025 World Watch List in the comments, and dropping another column on Sunday. For people who are watching this, reading my column, I thank you. Um, Share it with others, please. We're on now on Google Podcast, or, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. Other things are going to be happening. And until next time, God bless and goodbye.